Some people don't chase new shows. They return to the same ones again and again, the same scenes, the same characters, the same endings they already know by heart. And to the outside world, that looks strange. People ask, why would you watch something when you already know what happens? They assume it's laziness, a lack of curiosity, or an inability to move on. But psychology tells a very different story. Rewatching TV shows isn't about boredom. It's about regulation. Let's start with the brain. Novelty activates dopamine. Uncertainty spikes it. Plot twists, cliffhangers, new characters, they all demand cognitive energy. For some people, that's exciting. For others, it's exhausting. People who rewatch TV shows often have higher dopamine sensitivity. Their nervous system doesn't need constant surprise to feel stimulated. Too much novelty doesn't entertain them, it overwhelms them. So instead of chasing new input, they return to familiar narratives. And familiarity is not neutral, it's chemically calming. When you already know what's going to happen, your brain relaxes. The threat monitoring systems quiet down. The amygdala, the part responsible for detecting danger, reduces activity. In simple terms, your brain stops bracing for impact. That's why rewatching feels safe. And safety is addictive, not because it's exciting, but because it allows the nervous system to finally rest. This connects to something deeper, predictability. Human brains evolved to survive uncertainty, not to live inside it constantly. Modern life floods us with unpredictable stress, messages, news, social pressure, decision fatigue. Rewatching a show creates a controlled emotional environment. You already know who can be trusted. You already know who survives. You already know how the story resolves. That predictability gives the brain permission to lower its guard. Which brings us to memory. When you rewatch a show, you're not actually watching the same thing twice. Your brain has changed since the last time. Your experiences are different. Your emotional state has shifted, so the same scenes hit differently. A joke you ignored before suddenly feels meaningful. A character you disliked now makes sense. A quiet moment suddenly feels heavy. Rewatching isn't repetition, it's reprocessing psychologically. This is linked to how people integrate emotion. People who rewatch TV shows often process life internally. They don't always talk things out immediately. They revisit feelings slowly, safely, indirectly. Stories become emotional mirrors. Instead of confronting emotions head-on, they let familiar narratives carry the weight for them. There's also the sensory processing factor. Many people who rewatch shows are highly sensitive to emotional tone. They notice music shifts, pauses, New shows demand attention at every second. Familiar shows allow passive immersion. This is why rewatching often happens at night. The brain isn't looking to be stimulated, it's looking to be soothed. Think of it like a weighted blanket for the mind. Another layer most people miss is identity continuity. People who rewatch shows often feel a strong connection between their past and present selves. A show they loved at 16 still matters at 26, not because they haven't grown, but because they remember who they were. Rewatching becomes a way to check in with earlier versions of themselves. How did this make me feel back then? What do I notice now that I didn't before? This is tied to something psychologists call future self-continuity, the sense that your identity flows across time rather than being fixed. Rewatchers don't see themselves as static, they see themselves as evolving. So revisiting old stories doesn't feel regressive, it feels grounding. There's also a control element. New shows demand commitment, attention, emotional investment with unknown payoff. Rewatching removes that risk. You know it's worth your time, you know it won't disappoint you, you know it won't hijack your mood in ways you can't handle. For people who value emotional stability, that matters. This is why rewatching increases during stressful periods. Breakups, burnout, loneliness, life transitions. When external reality feels unstable, the mind seeks internal order, and familiar stories provide exactly that. Another misunderstood aspect is attachment. People who rewatch shows often form deep parasocial bonds, not shallow obsession, but emotional familiarity. The characters feel predictable, consistent, emotionally legible. Unlike real people, they don't suddenly change. They don't abandon you. They don't misunderstand you. This doesn't mean rewatchers avoid real relationships. It means they understand something quietly powerful. Not all connection has to demand energy. Sometimes presence without interaction is enough, like background companionship. This is also why rewatchers often dislike loud, chaotic content. Fast edits, constant shock, forced intensity. They prefer rhythm, tone, atmosphere. They're not chasing stimulation. They're managing their nervous system, and this leads to the biggest reframing of all. People who rewatch TV shows aren't stuck in the past. They're selective. They understand that attention is limited. Emotional energy is finite, and not every experience deserves access. They don't need novelty to feel alive. They need coherence. They want stories that make sense, characters that feel human, worlds that don't demand performance. In a culture obsessed with new, rewatchers quietly choose known, and that's not weakness, that's discernment. Because comfort isn't the absence of depth. It's what allows depth to surface. So if you rewatch the same shows, again and again, you're not boring, you're not afraid of change. You're not lacking imagination. You're regulating. You're integrating. You're protecting your mind in a noisy world. Because sometimes the story doesn't need to surprise you. It just needs to understand you. And familiar stories do that better than anything else. Silence isn't empty, and repetition isn't stagnation. For some minds, it's how clarity is restored.